Have you ever wondered why a series of identical busts of Napoleon are being mysteriously smashed across London? What secret could one tiny statue possibly hold that makes people risk everything to destroy it? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's tale is The Adventure of the Six Napoleons by Arthur Conan Doyle, a classic tale reimagined and retold for the modern age.
It wasn't unusual for Detective Lestrade of Scotland Yard to drop by our flat in the evenings. Sherlock welcomed these visits. They kept him connected to the pulse of London's police work. In return, Holmes lent a keen ear to the details of any ongoing case, occasionally offering a suggestion or insight drawn from his astonishing knowledge and razor-sharp intuition. That evening, Lestrade had started with small talk, weather, newspapers, before trailing off, puffing on his cigar as though pondering a puzzle only he could see. Holmes's eyes, sharp and penetrating, never left him. "Anything out of the ordinary?" Holmes asked casually. Lestrade shook his head. "Not particularly. Nothing you'd call urgent." Holmes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Then tell me about it." A wry smile crossed Lestrade's face. "Well, perhaps I should. It's a strange little matter, and frankly, it's almost ridiculous. But it's odd enough to pique your interest, and maybe Dr. Watson's as well." "Disease?" I asked, half joking. "Madness, if you like," Lestrade said, exhaling smoke slowly. "A very peculiar kind. You'd think no one alive today could harbor such fury against Napoleon Bonaparte, but apparently someone does. And this person doesn't just hate Napoleon in silence. They destroy every statue, every bust, every image they can find." Holmes reclined, unimpressed. "That hardly concerns me," he murmured. "Exactly my thought," Lestrade replied. "At first, I laughed it off, but then it escalated. This fanatic doesn't stop at smashing statues. They break into homes just to shatter these figures. That's no longer just a medical curiosity. That's a crime, and that brings it straight to the yard." Holmes snapped upright, suddenly alert. "Burglary, you say? Now that changes things. Give me every detail." Lestrade flipped open his official notebook, scanning its pages as if summoning the events back to life. "The first incident happened 4 days ago at the shop of Morse Hudson, a small gallery dealing in pictures and statues on Kennington Road. The assistant had stepped away from the front of the shop for just a moment when a loud crash rang out. Rushing back, he found a plaster bust of Napoleon standing among other works of art, shattered into fragments on the counter. He ran out to the street, hoping to catch the culprit, but though several bystanders claimed they had seen a man flee the shop, no one could be identified. There were no clues, no traces left behind, just a senseless act of destruction. The bust itself was worth only a few shillings, and the whole affair seemed too trivial to warrant serious investigation." Lestrade paused, eyes meeting Holmes's. "But the second case, now that was far stranger and far more alarming. It happened just last night." He leaned in, voice lowering. "Not far from Morse Hudson's shop, in Kennington Road, lives Dr. Barnicot, a well-known physician with one of the largest practices on the south side of the Thames. His main residence and consulting rooms are on Kennington Road, but he also runs a branch practice at Lower Brixton Road, a couple of miles away." Now, Dr. Barnicot is a devoted admirer of Napoleon. His home is practically a shrine, books, portraits, relics of the French emperor everywhere. Some time ago, he purchased from Morse Hudson 2 identical plaster busts of Napoleon, replicas of the famous head sculpted by Devine. One now stands in his hall on Kennington Road. The other graces the mantelpiece at his Brixton surgery. When Dr. Barnicot came down that morning, he was stunned. His house had clearly been broken into during the night, but strangely, nothing had been stolen, except for the plaster bust in his hall. It had been carried outside and smashed savagely against the garden wall, its shattered fragments scattered beneath. Holmes rubbed his hands together, a gleam of interest in his eyes. "This is certainly novel," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Lestrade nodded. "I thought you'd appreciate it. But that's not the end. Dr. Barnicot was expected at his Brixton surgery by noon. Imagine his shock when he arrived to find the window forced open and the second bust, his other prized Napoleon, reduced to splinters, strewn across the room like a violent work of abstract art. In both cases, there were no clues, no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry beyond the window, nothing to identify the culprit, human or lunatic. That, Mr. Holmes, is the situation in full." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Singular and almost grotesque. Tell me, were the two busts destroyed in Dr. Barnicot's possession exact duplicates of the one at Morse Hudson's shop?" "They came from the same mold," Lestrade confirmed. Holmes' eyes lit up with the spark of deduction. "Then this cannot simply be the work of someone motivated by a vague hatred of Napoleon. Consider, hundreds of statues of the Emperor exist across London, and yet this person has targeted 3 exact replicas from the same source. Such precision points to something far more deliberate than random vandalism." Lestrade shrugged. "I thought the same, but Morse Hudson is the only supplier of these busts in the neighborhood, and these 3 had been there for years. So while London may host countless Napoleonic statues, these were likely the only ones within reach of our local fanatic. It stands to reason that he would start here. What do you make of it, Dr. Watson?" "There are no limits to the strange obsessions of the human mind," I said. "The modern French psychologists call it an idée fixe, a fixed idea, trivial in itself, yet capable of taking complete hold of a person's actions while leaving all else sane. Perhaps a man who had studied Napoleon obsessively or carried some hereditary wound from the wars might form such a fixation and commit acts that seem utterly fantastic." Holmes shook his head with a faint smile. "That explanation won't hold, my dear Watson. No idée fixe, however intense, could account for our monomaniac knowing exactly where these busts were placed." "Well then, how do you explain it?" I asked. Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled. "I do not claim to explain it yet, but I note a certain method to the madness. Take Dr. Barnicot's hall, for instance, where any noise might awaken the household. The bust was carefully carried outside before being smashed, but at the surgery, where there was less risk of disturbance, it was destroyed right where it stood. Absurd, yes, but trivial? Never. Some of my most intricate cases have begun with the smallest, most insignificant details. Recall, Watson, how the Abernethy affair first came to my attention simply because of the way parsley sank into butter on a hot day."
"So, Lestrade, do not expect me to smile at your 3 broken Napoleons. I shall be grateful if you keep me informed of any further developments in this bizarre chain of events." The next morning, the developments arrived with shocking speed and far more urgency than anyone could have imagined. I was still dressing when there came a sharp tap at the door. Holmes entered, a telegram clutched in his hand. He read it aloud. "Come instantly, 131 Pitt Street, Kensington. Lestrade." "What is it then?" I asked, curiosity pricking at my nerves. "I don't know. It could be anything," Holmes replied, his eyes scanning the street outside the window. "But I suspect it's the next chapter in the story of the statues. Our friend, the image breaker, appears to have moved his operations to another corner of London. Coffee is on the table, Watson, and I have a cab waiting outside." Within half an hour we had arrived at Pitt Street, a quiet backwater tucked beside one of London's busiest thoroughfares.
Number 131 sat in a row of unremarkable flat-fronted houses, respectable, prosaic, and utterly unromantic. Yet as we approached, a curious crowd had gathered behind the railings, whispering and pointing. Holmes whistled softly. By George, if nothing else, London's messenger boys have a tale of attempted murder on their rounds. Look at the posture of that fellow, tense, ready for action. Footsteps everywhere, the top steps soaked, the others dry. Plenty of movement. He nodded toward a window. Ah, there's Lestrade. We shall soon know the details. The detective greeted us with a solemn expression and ushered us into the sitting-room. There, pacing nervously in a flannel dressing-gown, was an elderly man, unkempt and clearly agitated. Holmes introduced him, Mr. Horace Harker of the Central Press Syndicate. Lestrade spoke gravely. "It's the Napoleon bust business again. You seemed intrigued last night, Mr. Holmes, so I thought you might wish to witness this case now that it has escalated dramatically." "What has it escalated to?" I asked, sensing the tension in the room. Lestrade's voice dropped. "To murder. Mr. Harker, please tell these gentlemen exactly what has occurred." The man in the dressing-gown turned towards us, his face a portrait of despair. "It's extraordinary that all my life I have gathered the news of others, yet now that a true piece of news has come to me, I find myself so bewildered that I cannot string two words together." "If I were a journalist," Mr. Harker began, his voice trembling, "I could have interviewed myself and filled 2 columns in every evening paper. Instead, I keep telling my story over and over to anyone who will listen, giving away the tale without benefit. Yet I've heard of you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and if you can explain this bizarre business, I'll be rewarded just for speaking the truth." Holmes sank into a chair, eyes fixed at the man, listening intently. "It all revolves around that bust of Napoleon I bought for this very room about 4 months ago. I got it cheaply from Harding Brothers, just 2 doors from High Street Station. Much of my journalistic work is done at night, and I often write till dawn. Tonight was no exception. I was in my den at the back of the top floor around 3 o'clock when I was sure I heard a noise downstairs. When I entered this room, the window was wide open and the bust was gone from the mantelpiece. Why anyone would steal such a thing, merely plaster, worthless, is beyond me. You see, anyone could step from that window to the front doorstep with a long stride. That must have been what the intruder did. I ran outside, only to nearly stumble over a body in the dark. A man lying lifeless, his throat gaping with a terrible wound, blood pooling around him. He lay on his back, knees drawn up, mouth twisted in a silent scream. I'll see that image in my nightmares. I barely had time to blow my police whistle before everything went black. When I came to, a constable was standing over me in the hall. That was all I remember." "Well, who was the murdered man?" Holmes asked, his gaze sharp and probing. Lestrade shook his head gravely. "There's nothing to show who he was. You can see the body at the mortuary, but so far we've made nothing of it. He's a tall, sunburned man, very powerful, probably no older than 30. Poorly dressed, but not a labourer by any stretch. A horn-handled clasp knife was found in a pool of blood beside him. Whether it was the weapon or his own, we cannot say. His clothes bore no name, and his pockets contained only an apple, some string, a small map of London, and a photograph." He handed over the photo. The image, clearly a snapshot from a small camera, revealed a sharp-featured man with keen eyes, but his jaw and lower face projected strangely, almost like the muzzle of a baboon, giving him an unsettling, simian appearance. Holmes studied the picture with intensity. "And the bust, what became of it?" Lestrade replied,
"We just received news before you arrived. It was discovered in the front garden of an empty house on Camden House Road, smashed into fragments. I'm heading over now to inspect it. Care to join me?" "Certainly," Holmes said, glancing around the room first. He examined the carpet and the window ledge. This man either had extraordinarily long legs or was exceptionally agile. To reach that window, open it, and escape with ease was no small feat. Returning would have been comparatively simple. Holmes turned to Mr. Harker. "Shall we go see the remains of your bust?" The journalist had settled at his writing table, pen in hand, scribbling furiously. "I must try to make sense of it, though no doubt the first editions of the evening papers already have the full story. It's just my luck. Remember Doncaster, when the Stand collapsed? I was the only journalist in the Stand, and my paper missed the whole event because I was too shaken to write. And now, a murder on my own doorstep, and I'll be too late again." As we left the room, the sharp scratch of his pen on the foolscap followed us down the hall, a frantic soundtrack to a morning steeped in tragedy. The fragments of the bust had been found only a few hundred yards away. At last we laid eyes on this shattered likeness of the great emperor, the object that had driven a man to such frantic, destructive fury. Pieces of plaster lay scattered across the grass, jagged and glinting in the morning light. Holmes stooped and picked up several shards, turning them over with meticulous care. I could tell from the intensity in his eyes and the precision of his movements that he had finally found something, some clue that might unravel the mystery. "Well?" asked Lestrade, eager.
Holmes merely shrugged. "We have a long way to go, and yet we do have some suggestive facts. For this peculiar criminal, the possession of a trivial plaster bust seems to have mattered more than a human life. That is one point. Another is the curious fact that he did not smash it inside the house or immediately outside it, if destruction alone was his goal. He was rattled, Lestrade suggested. Confronted by that other man, he hardly knew what he was doing. "Perhaps," said Holmes, "but consider carefully the position of the house where the bust met its end." Lestrade looked around, frowning. "It's an empty house, so he knew no one would disturb him in the garden." "Yes, but there's another empty house farther up the street, which he must have passed to reach this one. Why not break it there, since every extra yard he carried it increased the risk of discovery?" Lestrade drew up his hands. "I give up." Holmes pointed upward to the street lamp above us. "He could see what he was doing here. He could not there. That is the reason. Every act, however reckless it seems, has a purpose to him." "By Jove, that's true!" Lestrade exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "Now that I think of it, Dr. Barnicott's bust was broken not far from his red lamp. Well, Mr. Holmes, what are we to make of that?" Holmes tapped his fingers together, thoughtful. "To remember it, to docket it. Some day it may connect to something else. Facts rarely lose their significance entirely. What do you propose we do next, Lestrade?" Lestrade shrugged, methodical as ever. "The most practical approach, in my opinion, is to identify the dead man. That shouldn't be too difficult. Once we know who he is and who his associates are, we can trace his movements in Pitt Street last night and perhaps discover who confronted him and committed the murder on Mr. Horace Harker's doorstep. Makes sense, doesn't it?" Holmes shook his head gently. "No doubt it makes sense, but it isn't quite the method I would choose." "And how would you proceed?" Lestrade asked, curious. "You must not let me influence you. You follow your line of investigation, I will follow mine. Later we will compare notes. Each of us will fill in gaps the other cannot see." "Very well," Lestrade agreed. Holmes turned to him with a sly smile. "If you return to Pitt Street, you might speak with Mr. Harker. Tell him for me that I am certain a dangerous homicidal lunatic obsessed with Napoleon was in his house last night.
It will make a good story for his article." Lestrade froze. "You don't seriously believe that?" Holmes chuckled softly. "Perhaps I do, perhaps I don't. But it will certainly capture Mr. Harker's attention and the interest of the subscribers to the Central Press Syndicate. Now, Watson, I think we have a long and rather complex day ahead of us. Lestrade, I should be grateful if you could join us at Baker Street at 6 this evening. Until then, I would like to keep this photograph, the one found in the dead man's pocket, for careful examination."
"It's possible," Holmes said, a spark of anticipation in his eyes, "that I may require your company and assistance on a small expedition tonight, should my reasoning prove correct. Until then, goodbye and good luck." Sherlock and I walked together to the High Street, stopping at the shop of Harding Brothers, where the infamous bust had been purchased. A young assistant greeted us, looking nervous and uncertain. "Mr. Harding will not be back until the afternoon," he explained. "I'm new here and can't offer much information." Holmes's face betrayed a flicker of disappointment. "Well, well, Watson," he said, "we cannot expect every path to be open to us. We shall return later. As you may have guessed, I am attempting to trace these busts to their source, to uncover any peculiarity that may explain their strange fate. In the meantime, we shall visit Mr. Morse Hudson on Kennington Road and see whether he can shed light on this curious problem." An hour's drive brought us to the picture dealer's shop. Mr. Hudson was a small, stout man, his face flushed red, and his manner peppery and excitable. "Yes, sir, right on my very counter," he began, waving his hands. "What do we pay rates and taxes for, if any ruffian can come in and smash our goods? Disgraceful, sir. I sold Dr. Barnicot his 2 statues. A nihilist plot, I say. No one but an anarchist or a Red Republican would go about smashing statues like this." "Do you know where the statues came from?" Holmes asked calmly. "Well, if you must know, I got them from Gelder & Co., Church Street, Stepney. They've been a well-known house for 20 years. As for the quantity, 3 in total. 2 sold to Dr. Barnicot, and 1 smashed in broad daylight right on my counter." Holmes's eyes flicked over the room, absorbing every detail. "And the photograph?" he asked, holding up the snapshot of the dead man. "Ah, yes, I know that one. That's Beppo, a sort of Italian piecework man, helped out in the shop when needed. Handy, quiet fellow, but nothing more as far as I know. He could carve a bit, gild and frame, do odd jobs. Left me last week, and I've heard nothing since. No idea where he came from, nor where he went. Never had a quarrel with him, and he was gone 2 days before the bust was smashed." Holmes nodded thoughtfully as we stepped out into the street. "Well, that is all we could reasonably expect from Morse Hudson. But note this, Watson. Beppo is a common factor, both in Kennington and Kensington. That alone makes this 10-mile drive worthwhile. Now we must go to Gelder & Co., Stepney, the origin of the busts. I shall be surprised if we do not gain some useful insight there." Our journey carried us swiftly through the many faces of London, the polished avenues of the fashionable district, the bustling hotels, the theatres, literary haunts, commercial streets, and finally the riverfront, where the city sweltered under the weight of 100,000 lives, the tenements thick with the forgotten and the outcast of Europe. At last we arrived at a broad thoroughfare, once home to wealthy city merchants. Here stood the sculpture works we sought. Outside, a vast yard of monumental masonry gleamed in the morning light. Inside, a large hall buzzed with 50 workers, carving and molding with practiced precision.
The manager, A tall, blond German with an efficient air received us courteously and answered Holmes's questions with clarity. A reference to the company books revealed that hundreds of casts had been made from a marble copy of Divine's famous head of Napoleon. Of the 6 casts in question, 3 had been sent to Morse Hudson a year earlier, and the remaining 3 to Harding Brothers in Kensington. "There is no reason," the manager said with a laugh, "why these 6 should differ from any of the others, nor can I suggest why anyone would wish to destroy them. Their wholesale price, 6 shillings. Retail, 12 or more. Hardly worth the trouble, in my opinion." Holmes's eyes gleamed, but he said nothing, his mind already racing along the threads of the mystery, piecing together the hidden motives that ordinary men could not yet see. The manager explained that each bust was cast in 2 halves, one for each side of the face, and then the profiles were carefully joined to form the complete Napoleon. Italians, skilled artisans, usually did the work in the very room we were in. Once finished, the plaster busts were laid on tables in the passage to dry before being stored. That, he said, was all he could tell us about the process. But when Holmes produced the photograph, the effect was immediate. The manager's face flushed red, and his brows knitted fiercely over his icy blue Teutonic eyes. "Ah, the rascal!" he barked. "Yes, I know him well. This has always been a respectable establishment. The only time the police were ever called here was because of this very fellow. Over a year ago now. He stabbed another Italian in the street and then came straight to the works, the police at his heels, and he was caught here. Beppo, that was his name. His second name I never knew. Served me right for hiring a man with such a face, but he was one of the best workmen I ever had." "What sentence did he receive?" Holmes inquired. "He lived, and got only a year. No doubt he is out now, but he has never dared show his face here since. We do have a cousin working here who might know where he is." Holmes shook his head firmly. "No, not a word to the cousin, not a single word. This matter is far more important than it seems. The farther I go, the more critical it grows. You referred to the sale of these casts in your ledger. I see the date is June 3rd of last year. Could you tell me roughly when Beppo was arrested?" The manager rifled through his pay records. "Yes, last payment to him was May 20th. "Thank you," Holmes said, his expression unreadable. "I believe we have taken all the time we need. Remember, say nothing to anyone about our investigations." With that, we turned westward, the air already thick with anticipation, each of us keenly aware that we were closing in on a truth far more dangerous and bizarre than we had imagined. The afternoon had slipped by before we managed a hurried luncheon at a small restaurant. Outside, a news bill blared. "Kensington outrage, murder by a madman." Inside, the paper carried Mr. Horace Harker's account in 2 sensational columns, dramatizing every grisly detail. Holmes propped the newspaper against the cruet stand and began reading while he ate. Once or twice, a soft chuckle escaped him. "This is all right, Watson," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Listen to this passage. It is satisfactory to know that there can be no difference of opinion upon this case, since Mr. Lestrade, one of the most experienced members of the official force, and Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the well-known consulting expert, have each concluded that the grotesque series of incidents which ended in such a tragic fashion arise from lunacy rather than deliberate crime. No explanation save mental aberration can account for the facts. The press, Watson, is invaluable if you only know how to use it." He paused, then added, "Now, let us return to Kensington and see what the manager of Harding Brothers has to say." The founder of the renowned emporium was a brisk, precise little man. Dapper, quick, and alert, with both a sharp mind and an equally sharp tongue. "Yes, sir, I have read the account in the evening papers.
Mr. Horace Harker is a valued customer of ours. We supplied him with the bust some months ago. As for the original order, we requested 3 busts from Gelder & Co. of Stepney. All 3 have now been sold. To whom? Our sales book will tell you. 1 to Mr. Harker, 1 to Mr. Josiah Brown of Laburnum Lodge, Laburnum Vale, Chiswick, and 1 to Mr. Sanderford of Lower Grove Road, Reading. No, I have never seen the face in this photograph, he added, glancing at the image we had shown him. You would hardly forget that face, would you, sir? The manager said, a hint of exasperation in his tone. I've seldom seen one uglier. Do we have any Italians among the staff? Yes, a few workmen and cleaners. They could glance at the sales book if they wished. There's no reason to guard it closely. Well, well, it's a very strange business, and I do hope you will let me know if your inquiries bear fruit. Holmes had taken several notes during the manager's account, his expression calm but intense. I could see he was thoroughly satisfied with the day's progress. He made no comment, however, except to remind me that we must hurry to meet Lestrade. By the time we reached Baker Street, Lestrade was already there, pacing in a fever of impatience. His eyes shone with the satisfaction of a day's work well done. "Well," he demanded, "what luck, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes leaned back slightly, calm and confident. "We have had a busy and fruitful day, not wasted. We have visited both retailers and wholesale manufacturers. I can now trace each of the busts from the moment they were made." "The busts?" Lestrade exclaimed. "Well, well, you have your own methods, Mr. Holmes, and I won't argue with them, but I believe I have done a better day's work than you. I have identified the dead man." "You don't say?" Holmes arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "And I have found a cause for the crime," Lestrade added. "Splendid," Holmes said, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. Lestrade straightened, his tone brimming with authority. "We have an inspector who specializes in Saffron Hill and the Italian Quarter. The dead man wore a Catholic emblem around his neck, and his complexion indicated a Southern origin. Inspector Hill recognized him immediately. His name? Pietro Venucci, from Naples, one of the most notorious cutthroats in all of London." A chill ran through me as the pieces began to fall into place. Holmes sat forward, his mind already racing, and I realized that we were on the brink of uncovering the truth behind the Six Napoleons.
"He is connected with the Mafia," Lestrade continued confidently, "which, as you know, is a secret political society, one that enforces its laws through murder. Now you see how the whole affair begins to make sense. The other man was likely an Italian as well, another member of the Mafia who had broken their code. Pietro was sent to track him down. The photograph we found in his pocket was probably meant to prevent him from killing the wrong man. He follows his target, watches him enter a house, waits outside, and when the man comes out, a struggle follows. In that struggle, Pietro receives the fatal wound himself. How does that strike you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Holmes clapped his hands together in genuine admiration. "Excellent, Lestrade, excellent," he exclaimed. "A clear, logical theory. But there is just one small detail I failed to see addressed, the destruction of the busts." "The busts!" Lestrade snapped, almost irritated. "You can never get those busts out of your head. After all, that's nothing. Petty larceny at worst. 6 months, perhaps. The murder is what truly matters, and I tell you I have nearly gathered all the threads into my hands." "And the next step?" asked Holmes calmly. "A very simple one," said Lestrade. "Inspector Hill and I will go down to the Italian Quarter, find the man whose photograph we have, and arrest him for murder. Will you come with us?" Holmes shook his head slightly. "I think not. I believe we can reach our goal in a far simpler way. I cannot be absolutely certain.
Everything depends on a factor completely beyond our control. Still, I have strong hopes. In fact, he added with a faint smile, I would put the odds at exactly 2 to 1 that if you accompany me tonight, I can help you lay your man by the heels. In the Italian quarter? Asked Holmes. No, I rather suspect that Chiswick is a far more promising destination. Chiswick? Yes. If you will come with me to Chiswick tonight, Lestrade, I promise that I shall accompany you to the Italian quarter tomorrow. No harm will come of the delay. He rose and stretched slightly. And now a few hours' sleep would do us all the good in the world. I do not propose to leave before 11 o'clock, and it is unlikely that we shall return before morning. I looked at Holmes and knew from the quiet certainty in his voice that the mystery of the Six Napoleons was approaching its final and inevitable reckoning. "You'll dine with us, Lestrade," Holmes said, "and then you are welcome to the sofa until it is time to start. In the meantime, Watson, I should be glad if you would send an express messenger. I have a letter that must go immediately." The evening passed with Holmes immersed among the dusty files of old daily papers stacked high in one of our lumber rooms. When he finally descended, a spark of triumph danced in his eyes, but he said nothing of what he had uncovered. I had followed step by step the intricate methods by which he had traced this bizarre case. Though the ultimate goal was still hidden from me, it was clear that the grotesque criminal would strike again, targeting one of the last 2 busts. The one I remembered was at Chiswick. The brilliance of Holmes's plan became apparent. He had deliberately planted a false clue in the evening paper, making the culprit believe he could continue his campaign without interference. I was not surprised when Holmes suggested I bring my revolver. He himself carried his favorite weapon, a loaded hunting crop, ready for the confrontation.
At 11 o'clock, a 4-wheeled cab waited at the door. We drove silently across the city to a spot beyond Hammersmith Bridge, where the driver was instructed to wait. A short walk brought us to a secluded street lined with stately houses, each nestled within its own grounds. In the dim glow of a street lamp, we read the sign, Laburnum Villa. All was quiet. The household had long since retired. Darkness cloaked every window except for a faint fanlight above the front door, which cast a blurred circle of light onto the garden path. The wooden fence separating the property from the street formed a deep shadow, and here, in the darkness, we crouched, silent, watchful, and ready for the final act. "I fear that you'll have a long wait," Holmes whispered, his eyes scanning the shadowed garden. "We may thank our stars that it isn't raining. I don't think we can even risk a smoke to pass the time. Still, the odds are 2 to 1 that our patience will be rewarded." Yet the vigil was far shorter than he had predicted. Suddenly, without a sound to announce him, the garden gate swung open, and a lithe, dark figure, quick and agile, almost like a jungle predator, darted along the path. The faint glow from the fanlight caught him as he passed, then he vanished into the black shadow of the house. A long, tense pause followed. Then a subtle creaking whispered through the night. The window was being opened. Silence fell again as the intruder made his way inside. A dark lantern flickered, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the rooms. Whatever he sought was not there. He moved swiftly from one window to another, the flicker of light showing his restless search. "Let us move to the open window," Lestrade hissed. "We will catch him as he climbs out." But before we could act, he emerged once more. In the pale pool of light, we saw him clutch something white under his arm. He scanned the empty street cautiously, reassured by the silence, and set his burden down. Then came the sharp, unmistakable tap of plaster against wood, followed by the clatter of shattered fragments. So focused was he on his task that he did not hear us approaching across the grass. With the explosive leap of a tiger, Holmes struck from behind, pinning him to the ground. In an instant, Lestrade and I had secured his wrists, and the handcuffs clicked shut. As we rolled him over, I caught sight of a hideous, sallow face twisted with fury. The very man from the photograph, Pietro Vannucci, finally in our grasp. Yet Holmes's attention was not on the prisoner alone. His keen eyes already sought the object that had driven this madness, the last piece of the puzzle, hidden in plain sight. Holmes squatted on the doorstep, carefully examining the object the man had carried from the house. It was a bust of Napoleon, just like the one we'd seen that morning, now shattered into jagged fragments. Each shard caught the light differently, but in essence it was identical to the others, just another piece of plaster. Yet it had been the obsession that drove this criminal to murder. He had just finished his meticulous inspection when the hall lights blazed on. The door opened, and a jovial, round-shouldered man appeared, dressed simply in shirt and trousers. "Mr. Josiah Brown, I suppose?" Holmes asked. "Yes, sir," he replied warmly, "and you must be Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I received your note by express messenger and did exactly as you instructed. We locked every door inside and waited. I'm very glad to see that you've caught the rascal. Please, gentlemen, come in for some refreshment."
Lestrade, however, was eager to secure the prisoner, so within minutes a cab was called and we were heading back to London. Our captive said not a word, his matted hair shadowing his sallow face. Once, when my hand came too close, he snapped at it like a hungry wolf, a final glimpse of the ferocity that had fueled his crimes. At the police station, a search revealed little: a few shillings and a long sheath knife, its handle stained with fresh blood. "That's all right," Lestrade said with satisfaction as we parted ways. "Inspector Hill knows these men well. He'll identify him. My theory about the mafia seems to hold up. And, Mr. Holmes," he added, genuinely impressed, "I am exceedingly grateful for the professional way you captured him. I don't yet understand all the pieces, but you've certainly brought this chapter to a close." Holmes merely nodded, his eyes already reflecting the next case, but I could see a faint smile of satisfaction at having once more unraveled a crime that had seemed utterly impossible. "I fear it is rather too late for explanations," Holmes said, his eyes scanning the room. "Besides, a few loose ends remain, and this is the sort of case that demands to be seen through to the very end. If you will come to my rooms at 6 tomorrow evening, I believe I can show you that even now the full meaning of this affair has not yet been revealed. It is a case unlike any in the history of crime, and, Watson, if ever I permit you to chronicle my little problems again, you may enliven your pages with the extraordinary adventure of the Napoleonic busts." The following evening, Lestrade arrived armed with further details about our prisoner. His name was Beppo, last name unknown, a notorious figure among the Italian colony. Once a skilled sculptor who had earned an honest living, he had strayed into a life of crime. Twice already he had been imprisoned, once for petty theft, once for stabbing a fellow countryman. He spoke English fluently, though his motives remained a mystery. He refused to answer questions about the busts, though the police suspected he might have crafted the very same busts with his own hands at Gelder & Company, the Stepney establishment. Holmes listened with polite attention, as always, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Beneath his calm exterior, I could detect a mixture of unease and anticipation, the spark of discovery about to ignite. Suddenly, his eyes brightened. A ring at the bell echoed through the room. Footsteps climbed the stairs. A moment later, an elderly, red-faced man with grizzled side whiskers was ushered in. In his right hand, he carried an old-fashioned carpet bag, which he placed carefully on the table. He leaned forward, a glint of excitement in his eyes. This was the moment, the piece that would finally bring the whole bizarre puzzle into focus.
A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. "Is Mr. Sherlock Holmes here?" came a polite, slightly anxious voice. Holmes looked up, a faint smile crossing his face. "Mr. Sandiford of Reading, I presume?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. I fear I am a little late. The trains were awkward. You wrote to me regarding a bust in my possession." "Exactly," Holmes replied smoothly. Sandiford's brow furrowed slightly. "I was very surprised by your letter. I could not imagine how you knew that I owned such a thing." "Ah, the explanation is simple. Mr. Harding of Harding Brothers informed me that they had sold you their last copy, and he gave me your address." "Oh, that was it, was it? Did he mention what I paid for it?" "No," Holmes replied, his eyes glinting.
Sandiford smiled faintly. "Well, I am an honest man, though not a wealthy one. I paid only 15 shillings for the bust. I think you ought to know that before I accept £10 from you." Holmes inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Your scruple does you credit, Mr. Sandiford, but I named the price and I intend to honor it." A faint relief passed over Sandiford's face. "Very well, sir. I brought the bust with me, as you requested. Here it is." He opened his bag, and at last we beheld it, a complete, perfect copy of the divine Napoleon bust, whole and unbroken, unlike the fragments we had chased across London. Holmes carefully withdrew a piece of paper and laid a crisp £10 note on the table. "You will kindly sign this," he said, "in the presence of witnesses. It simply transfers every right you may have in this bust to me. One can never be too careful in such matters." Sandiford signed. Holmes handed him the note. "Thank you, Mr. Sandiford, and a very good evening to you." With that, the last piece of the puzzle was in our hands. One could almost feel the invisible threads of the entire case converging. Once our visitor had departed, Holmes moved with a precision that immediately drew our full attention. He opened a drawer, producing a clean white cloth, and spread it carefully over the table. At the center, he placed the final bust, the last intact Napoleon. Then, with his hunting crop in hand, he raised it and struck the top of the bust sharply. The plaster shattered into fragments, scattering across the cloth. Holmes bent over the pieces, his eyes sharp and calculating. Then, suddenly, a cry of triumph rang out. He held up a small, dark object, gleaming in the light. "Gentlemen," he announced, "allow me to present the famous Black Pearl of the Borgias." Lestrade and I sat frozen for a moment. Then, almost instinctively, we applauded, as if witnessing the climax of a masterful drama. Holmes' pale cheeks flushed with a rare warmth, and he inclined his head, accepting our admiration. For an instant, the brilliant, calculating detective revealed the human heart beneath his reserved exterior, a heart that delighted in recognition from a friend. "Yes, gentlemen," Holmes continued, his voice steady now with satisfaction, "this is the most famous pearl in existence. Through a careful chain of inductive reasoning, I have traced it from the bedroom of the Prince of Colonna at the Dacre Hotel, where it was first lost, straight into this, the final one of 6 Napoleon busts produced by Gelder & Co. of Stepney. You may recall, Lestrade, the great uproar caused by the disappearance of this jewel and the frustrating inability of the London police to recover it. I was consulted at the time, yet even I was initially unable to shed light upon its disappearance. Suspicion had naturally fallen on the princess's maid, an Italian named Lucretia Venucci. It was soon clear that her brother was in London, but no direct connection between the two could be traced at first. The maid's brother, I now realized, was the same Pietro who had been murdered 2 nights ago. Holmes, with his usual methodical precision, consulted the old files of the press. "Notice the dates," he said, pointing out the sequence. "The disappearance of the pearl occurred exactly 2 days before Beppo's arrest for a violent crime, a moment coinciding with the very time these busts were being crafted at Gelder & Co.'s factory. Once you follow the timeline, the chain of events becomes clear, though you witness it in reverse to how it unfolded in real time." Holmes leaned forward, eyes alight. Beppo had the pearl. Perhaps he stole it from Pietro, perhaps he was his confederate, or the intermediary between Pietro and his sister. The exact details are irrelevant. What matters is that Beppo held the pearl, and at that precise moment he was being pursued by the police. With the authorities close behind, he rushed to the factory where he worked, knowing he had only minutes to conceal the priceless gem, which would otherwise have been found on him during a search. There, in the passage, 6 plaster busts of Napoleon were drying. One of them was still soft. With the skill of a master workman, Beppo carved a tiny hole into the wet plaster, slipped the pearl inside, and then with a few careful touches sealed the opening perfectly. It was an ingenious hiding place, impossible for anyone to discover. But fate was cruel. Beppo was soon sentenced to a year in prison, and in the meantime the 6 busts were scattered across London. He could not know which contained the treasure. Only by smashing them piece by piece could he ever hope to retrieve the pearl. And indeed, even shaking them would have revealed nothing. The wet plaster held the jewel firmly in place, just as we saw it today. Beppo did not give in to despair. He pursued his quarry with remarkable ingenuity and persistence. Using a cousin who worked at Gelder & Co., he discovered which retail firms had purchased the busts. By securing employment with Morse Hudson, he was able to track down 3 of them, but the pearl was not among them. With the help of an Italian employee, Beppo eventually learned the locations of the remaining 3 busts. The first was at Harker's house. There, a grim confrontation awaited him. His own confederate, holding him responsible for the pearl's disappearance, stabbed him in a violent struggle. I asked, if he was a confederate, why would he carry his photograph? Holmes explained, it was a means of tracing him. If any third party inquired, the photograph would confirm his identity. After the murder, I reasoned that Beppo would hasten rather than delay. He feared the police might intercept his secret, so he moved quickly, with little time to waste. I could not yet be certain whether he had already found the pearl in Harker's bust, but his actions made it obvious that he was searching for something. He carried the bust past the other houses, intentionally breaking it in the garden under a lamp, so as to avoid arousing suspicion indoors. Harker's bust was 1 in 3. The odds were 2 to 1 against the pearl being inside it. That left only 2 more. The next obvious target was the London bust. We had prepared the house carefully to prevent another tragedy, and the result was a success. By then, I was certain that the object of this long, bizarre pursuit was none other than the famous Borgia pearl. And finally, Holmes said, a gleam in his eyes, there remained the last bust, in Reading. I bought it from its owner in your presence, and there it lay, the pearl safe at last. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the case settle around us. "Well," said Lestrade at last, "I've seen you handle a great many cases, Mr. Holmes, but I don't know that I've ever witnessed a more workmanlike one than this. Scotland Yard is not jealous of you, no sir. We're proud of you. If you come down tomorrow, there won't be a man from the oldest inspector to the youngest constable who wouldn't be glad to shake your hand." Thank you," Holmes said warmly, and for a fleeting instant I glimpsed a side of him rarely revealed, a touch of human emotion, quietly proud and satisfied. But almost immediately he resumed his familiar, coldly analytical air. "Put the pearl in the safe, Watson," he instructed, "and fetch the papers of the Conk Singleton forgery case. Goodbye, Lestrade, and should any little problem come your way, I shall be happy, if I can, to give you a hint or two toward its solution." With that, he turned back to his work, leaving us to marvel at the curious blend of genius and human feeling that made Sherlock Holmes unique.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.